Get ready, because what you're about to hear is not just another one of those saint stories that seem far from our reality. Not at all. The story of St. Angelo Foligno is a true life-changing one of those that could become a script for a series, with drama, losses, radical conversion, and even breathtaking supernatural phenomena. She wasn't born a saint, quite the opposite. For years, she lived immersed in the pleasures and vanities of the world, completely ignoring her faith. You know that feeling that you can do anything, that nothing will touch you? Well, that's exactly how she lived, until life decided to throw a curveball that changes everything. And the most impressive thing? This change didn't happen smoothly. It was in the midst of tragedies, losses, and even a devastating earthquake that the transformation began. And before you think that this is just another story of overcoming, I'll tell you right now, what's coming is a deep dive into mystical experiences that still defy human logic. We're talking about visions of Christ, spiritual ecstasies, and even a direct fight against temptations that many of us are familiar with. And you know what's best? At the end of this video, you'll discover that the lessons St. Angela left are not just for religious people or theologians. They're for me, for you, and for anyone who has ever felt lost, broken, and looking for a way out. So stay with me until the end, because what you'll learn here could change the way you see life and your faith. There comes a time in life when it seems like the whole world is inviting you to a party, and that was exactly the atmosphere in which St. Angela Foligno spent much of her youth. Born into a wealthy family, she had access to everything money could buy: fine clothes, banquets, travel, and the best social events in town. Angela lived as if she were the protagonist of a luxury soap opera, but without a spiritual plot. At that time, she didn't worry about virtues or moral values. The important thing was the next fun. It was as if each day was a new opportunity to escape any deeper reflection on life. While many sought faith, Angela sought the spotlight of vanity. She paraded through the streets with an air of superiority, carrying the look of someone who had everything, but in reality, there was an emptiness that she herself could not yet see. It wasn't just her. Her own husband, one of the richest men in town, also shared this unruly lifestyle. Together, they formed the typical couple that the neighbors envied, but who spiritually were heading towards a silent abyss. Their house might have the best tapestries, but their hearts, oh, that was covered in dust and indifference. It's curious how life has its ways of giving signs, but at that time, Angela was completely deaf to any divine call. She lived numb to the glamour of the time, like someone watching a fireworks show, but not realizing the darkness that comes right after. And so time went by. The parties got bigger, the applause was constant, and her soul kept moving further and further away from God. Little did she know that an emotional and spiritual earthquake was about to happen, and the first crack would begin with a pain that no amount of wealth could prevent. Life, which had previously seemed like an endless party for Angela de Foligno, began to show the other side of the coin: loss, pain, and a harsh reality that no one likes to face. First came the death of her mother, a blow that had already stirred her emotions, but was not enough to awaken her spiritual consciousness. Soon after, her husband, the one who had always been her accomplice in her vanities, also passed away. And as if that were not enough, one by one, her children left. Each funeral was like a direct blow to the heart, taking away not only her loved ones, but also any illusion of control over her life. Just imagine, in a matter of a short time, that woman surrounded by children, parties, and wealth suddenly finds herself alone inside a house that was once full of voices and laughter. Now, only the echo of loneliness. There was no more laughter, no more music, only the sound of endless mourning. And it was during this spiral of suffering that Angela began to look inside herself for the first time. She asked herself, what good is everything I had if now I don't even have the company of the people I loved left? It is at this point that many people also awaken to a new path. If you have ever experienced a loss, you know exactly how big that emotional hole is. And as if the grief were not enough, in 1279, there was a great earthquake that devastated the region of Foligno. Houses, castles, and churches. Everything collapsed in the blink of an eye. The ground that had once seemed so solid now shook beneath everyone's feet. It was as if God was saying to her and to the entire city, nothing earthly is eternal. Many lost everything in minutes, and that scene of destruction deeply affected the collective conscience. Angela looked at those ruins and understood that her life was like that too, collapsed, fragile, and in need of reconstruction. And it was from this shock that a spark of transformation began to be born within her, something that would soon make her seek a new direction. When we think that life has taken everything from us, that is precisely when God begins to plant the seeds of a new story. It was in this scenario of pain and emptiness that Angela de Foligno met the example of a man who would radically change the course of her life. Bless Pedro Chrysi. Pedro was young, successful, full of material possessions. But, unexpectedly, he decided to give up everything to follow the path of penance, inspired by St. Francis of Assisi. He sold all his possessions, distributed them to the poor, and began to live as a simple servant of God. A gesture of detachment so radical that, let's face it, it would make anyone stop and think. And that is exactly what happened to Angela. Pedro Chrysi's testimony worked like a great mirror that forced Angela to see how far she was from what really mattered. She realized that she needed an urgent change, but where to start? The answer came in the form of a burning desire for confession. She wanted, with all her strength, to reconcile with God, but it wasn't just any confession. Angela felt that she needed someone who would not only listen to her, but also guide her. It was then that she knelt down and said a sincere prayer to Our Lady, asking for a confessor who would also be a true spiritual director. If you have ever felt this need for guidance at some point in your life, you know how much this request was filled with anguish and hope. And then, as if in a script written by heaven itself, came the dream with St. Francis of Assisi, where the saint reassured her, saying that her request would be granted. When she woke up, she made an immediate decision. She went to Cathedral Foligno, and there she met Friar Arnold, a Franciscan who, curiously, was also a relative of hers. This meeting was much more than a simple coincidence. It was the beginning of a spiritual friendship that would change Angela's life forever. Friar Arnoldo not only heard her confession, he accompanied her, advised her, guided her, and, years later, would become the one responsible for writing everything she would experience in the next chapters of this impressive story. Little did she know that this confession would be the first step in a journey of faith that would take her far beyond what she could have imagined. The turning point in Angela Foligno's life did not stop at confession. Quite the opposite. That was where it all really began. With a transformed heart, she made a decision that many thought was crazy. She sold all her possessions, gave everything to the poor, and decided to live a life of extreme simplicity. That was when she joined the Third Order of St. Francis, a path of spirituality dedicated to lay people who wish to follow in the footsteps of St. Francis of Assisi without necessarily living in a convent. For those who today seek to live their faith in the midst of ordinary life, with work, family, and responsibilities, Angela's choice serves as a real example that it is possible to live holiness. From that moment on, what had previously been ostentation became humility. Luxurious clothes were exchanged for simple attire. Parties gave way to prayer, and banquets were replaced by fasting and penance. But be careful. Don't think that Angela did this out of obligation or fear. She did it out of love. A love for God so great that it overflowed in every gesture. And here is a practical example. Just as she dedicated hours to reading the Holy Scriptures, you can also start by setting aside 15 minutes of your day to meditate on a psalm or a passage from the Gospels. Her transformation shows that life change begins with small daily choices, in the details of routine. But Angela's journey would have other surprising chapters. After entering the Third Order, she was instructed, in a dream, by St. Francis to make a pilgrimage to the city of Assisi. She obeyed immediately, as someone who understands that orders from heaven cannot wait. And it was on this pilgrimage that new mystical experiences began to manifest themselves with greater force. Angela was just beginning to explore a spiritual dimension that few had the privilege of reaching. Little did she know that soon, upon arriving in Assisi, she would experience moments of rapture that would mark her story forever. Upon arriving in Assisi, Angela Foligno's spiritual life entered a new phase, much deeper and more intense. These were not just feelings of faith or moments of emotion. She began to experience real and remarkable mystical experiences. On several occasions, Angela had visions of Christ, the Holy Spirit, and clear manifestations of God's immense love for humanity. These experiences were not limited to the invisible. She began to feel, in her own body, the signs of the passion of Christ. Imagine someone physically feeling the pain that Jesus suffered on the cross. This shows the level of spiritual union she achieved. For those seeking an example of total surrender, Angela is a living portrait of this absolute immersion in faith. The most impressive thing is that all of this was recorded by Friar Arnold, her confessor, who wrote down each story, each vision, each mystical experience that she had. These writings would later become study material in the theology schools of the time. Yes, what Angela experienced in prayer ended up impacting even the academic world. And here's some practical advice. If you feel that God speaks to you during moments of prayer or during events in your life, write everything down. Keep a spiritual diary. Write down your experiences, your doubts, your gratitudes. Over time, you will notice how God builds a guiding thread in the little things of everyday life. Angela's devotion to the cross was so intense that just seeing a simple image of the Passion was enough to send her into a state of ecstasy or spiritual fever. And don't think that this was an emotional exaggeration. Friar Arnaldo, who followed everything closely, witnessed these phenomena. Angela said that the cross was the book that everyone needed to read. This makes us think, how many times do we look at a crucifix and not reflect on the real meaning of that sacrifice? She understood that there was the greatest act of love in history, but the most challenging events of her life were yet to come, and they would come from where she least expected. If there is one thing that the story of St. Angela of Foligno teaches us, it is that spiritual struggle is real and intense. After so many mystical experiences and a life completely dedicated to faith, she became the target of constant attacks from the enemy. The devil used every strategy. Sometimes he would bring to her mind memories of the parties, vanities, and lusts of her youth. Sometimes he would try to instill impure desires in her, touching precisely on the points that had previously been her weaknesses. And look, this is where many people identify, because anyone who has tried to change their life knows that temptations do not disappear. They change form, but they are still there, knocking on the door. But Angela was no longer the vulnerable and distracted woman she once was. She knew that the fight was now spiritual, and so she fought back with all the weapons she had. Intense prayer, prolonged fasting, physical mortifications, and above all, a lot of charity. When the enemy tried to bring her down with thoughts of despair, she responded by helping the poor, visiting the sick, and caring for lepers. A practical example for anyone facing temptation today is to do good immediately. Instead of giving in to sadness or sin, go visit a hospital, donate food, or even pray for those who suffer the most. This is how she won every battle. Angela lived this fight until the end of her life. At the age of 61, on January 4th, 1309, she surrendered her soul to God, already recognized by the people as a true saint. But official recognition by the Church would only come centuries later, in 2013, with her canonization. Today, she is the patron saint of widows and those who face temptations against chastity. But her message goes far beyond these titles. She left a legacy that spans generations. The certainty that, in order to maintain God's grace, one must keep one's eyes fixed on the cross. And speaking of the cross, what could have motivated Angela to look at it with such fervor, even in the worst moments? And now that you know about this impressive journey, tell me, what part of the story of St. Angela of Foligno touched you the most? Was it the radical transformation of her life, the fight against temptations, or the mystical experiences so intense that they seem like something out of a movie, but they really happened? The great truth is that if there's one thing that this story teaches us, it is that it is never too late to start over. It is never too late to turn your spiritual game around and seek a life of meaning. And between us, have you looked at your own cross with the seriousness it deserves? Have you seen the difficulties of life as a call from God for a greater transformation? If you felt in your heart that desire to change, to seek a more lively faith and a life more connected to God, now is the time. How about starting by saying a deeper prayer today? Or taking a few minutes to read a passage from the Bible, like Psalm 51, which talks about repentance and conversion. You can also start by helping someone in need. A simple gesture can be your first step towards transformation. But be careful, don't let this urge pass you by. Don't turn this video into just another piece of information that you'll forget tomorrow. And before you leave, do the following. Subscribe to the channel now, activate the notification bell, and leave a comment below with a practical action you'll take today to begin your spiritual transformation. Your interaction here makes all the difference and helps me to continue bringing you content like this. So, how about starting right now? I'm waiting for your answer in the comments.